Welcome to the GAMERamble video review for Knock Knock, narrated by me, Dark Cloud. As always, the full text version of this review can be found on the GAMERamble website linked below. The TLDR for Knock Knock is that it's not a very conventional game, which is both a blessing and a curse. The title can easily confuse and frustrate players, as it could be more forthcoming with what it expects from you. However, once you figure out the gameplay mechanics, you'll find it can be a fascinating and creepy experience. Wandering around a house in the dark while fixing lights and hiding from ghosts may not sound very original, but the way in which Knock Knock does it certainly is. Ultimately, it's another one of those love it or hate it games, which makes it hard to recommend to everyone. Gameplay receives a 5 out of 10. The game is frequently frustrating and quite repetitive, but also strangely compelling. Graphics receives an 8 out of 10. The 2D art is very unique and looks great. Sound receives an 8 out of 10. There's not much music, but the sound effects are excellent. The overall score for Knock Knock is 7 out of 10. And now for the full review. Count yourself very lucky if you've never woken up in the middle of the night after hearing a strange noise coming from somewhere in your house. It's even worse if you can't be sure whether the noise that woke you came from your house or was just part of a dream. Knock Knock is an indie game that captures this feeling of dread and being disoriented perfectly, but depending on how willing you are to figure things out for yourself, it may be too obscure for most players. The game opens with a cryptic message telling you that it's not actually a game but an experience. You then discover that the character you control is a wide-eyed insomniac clad only in pajamas, a scarf and some slippers. With his unruly hair and the dark circles beneath his eyes, he certainly doesn't look like someone you'd want to encounter in the dark. Apparently, our protagonist is known only as the Lodger, and he has a bit of an issue with his house. It's an unusual cabin situated deep within the woods, where he and his predecessors all worked as worldologists, whatever that may be. Lately, the Lodger has begun to notice strange things in the house that has served as a lab and dwelling for 3 generations of lodgers. Things have started to go missing. His sleep is constantly interrupted by strange noises, and he has a dreadful feeling that something odd is coming out of the woods and infiltrating his house. The question is, are there really supernatural events taking place, or is it all simply in his head? To say that Knock Knock is a unique game would be an understatement. It initially appears to be some type of survival horror title, but it does a marvelous job of not really explaining anything to players. In fact, we would wager that most players end up wandering around aimlessly in the house they are tasked with safeguarding without really knowing what to do. You see, there's no way to attack the unwanted guests that appear in your house, and the only way to avoid them is by hiding. The game simply tells you to stay awake and sane until dawn, but this seemingly simple task is complicated by a game that flat out refuses to hold your hand. The basic gameplay mechanics of Knock Knock involves walking from room to room in your house with its 2D randomized rooms. In each room you can hold down a button to fix the light in the room, which will banish all the shadows and allow you to walk through the room at a brisk pace instead of creeping, which is your default speed in the dark. In most rooms you'll notice that the Lodger will close his eyes as soon as you switch on the light, allowing him to remember the contents of the room, which then becomes visible. This is vital as most of the rooms in the house are entirely bare until you do this, which means there's no place to hide. One might think that the best way to stay safe until dawn is to switch on all the lights and hide somewhere, but this is actually the worst thing you can do. For one thing, you cannot see the guests in all the rooms where the light is on, so you have no way of noticing them sneaking up on you. Contact with the guests results in your character losing time, which means it will take longer for dawn to arrive. If you lose too much time, it's back to the start of the level. Hiding also has a downside, as time will flow backward while you do it, which means you'll never see dawn if you cower away behind something. Finally, the Lodger has lost something very important, and exploring all the rooms in the house is the only way of discovering it again, and discovering more about the cryptic story. Of course, the game doesn't explain any of this to you, which can make things very confusing until you figure it out. Another thing that makes Knock Knock extremely tricky is the randomized nature of the game. The house changes each night, and some layouts are just way more hazardous than others. It's also very easy to end up in situations with nowhere to hide, and multiple guests heading your way, which is highly frustrating. Luckily, you can zoom out to view the entire house, which helps you to plan out ahead where to go next and which rooms to avoid. The game also warns you where the breaches that let in the guests will appear, but you must reach them in time to switch on the light and prevent them from opening. Lightning flashes highlight the location of each room that is about to be breached, but sometimes you are too far away to get to them in time. Then there are the maze-like forest levels, where you can venture outside your house and try to catch up with a girl hiding some interesting secrets. Your character can even enter the breaches that spawn the guests, but while there are certain advantages to doing so, the outcome is always restarting the level. If you make it far enough into the game, there's even a sanity meter that comes into play. Once again, this is bound to be the source of frustration for players, as the game never explains what it is and just how valuable time becomes once it's active. Let's just say that it's entirely too easy to end up with no sanity and no option but to restart the entire game if you're not careful. Unlike the clocks you can find throughout the game that enables you to fast forward time, there's no way to regain lost sanity. While it's easy to criticize the obscure elements of Knock Knock, there's no faulting the visuals. Ice Pick Lodge has chosen a unique art style for the game, and while it appears very cartoonish at first, it matches the creepy atmosphere perfectly. The lodger looks positively unhinged, especially when he stares straight at the screen while addressing the player. His hair also has a habit of casting some very disturbing shadows on the walls. The guests are also a creepy bunch, ranging from piles of leaves with legs sticking out of them, to headless apparitions in straitjackets, and even a doppelganger. Knock Knock also excels when it comes to audio, and while it doesn't have much in the way of music, it more than makes up for it with the sound effects. Playing this game alone in the dark with headphones is an unnerving experience, purely because of the constant knocking, creaking and other sounds that bombard you. You'll also hear whispers occasionally, and the lodger has his own gibberish way of talking. A couple of times we were so engrossed in the game that we jumped as a door slammed in our face or a light bulb exploded in a shower of sparks. Overall, we like a lot about Knock Knock, and we can certainly appreciate how unique it is, but there's no denying that it's a very divisive game. Some players will enjoy playing cat and mouse with the visitors in their house, while others will see nothing except tedium and repetition. The confusing hallway and forest segments don't do much to endear the game to players either. The fact that it's so easy to reach the final levels in the game, only to find that you don't have enough sanity to proceed, is also pretty harsh. Then there are the technical difficulties that we encountered. For some reason, the lodger slowed down nearly to a crawl when creeping in the dark, and initially we thought this was just how the game worked. It wasn't until we messed around with the vertical sync settings in an NVIDIA control panel that we got him to creep at an average speed. Another peculiar aspect of the game is how you can fix the light bulbs in the room from anywhere you stand, which is rather odd if the light bulb is actually located in the center of the room. Knock Knock is not a game to play if you expect easy answers or a game that guides you every step of the way. However, you might appreciate the game if you want to experience a survival horror title where the scares are more psychological than anything else. It definitely requires some patience and perseverance if you're going to get the most out of it, but in the end it intrigued us enough that we had to see it through all the way to the end. Some flaws may be a little too much for most players to overlook, but if you can look past them, you'll find an interesting and unique game. Thank you for joining me for this Knock Knock PC review. Remember to like, subscribe and share. Until next time.